and any prayer requests you have. That would be awesome because we love to look at those and celebrate with you and pray over you and for you. So my goal setting this week is I actually just got back from vacation, the first trip I've taken, longer trip I've taken since working here, and I got to go to Wisconsin for the first time. And I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like if you haven't been to a state before, you're kind of just like, what could possibly be in Wisconsin? But it was so beautiful. I was on the lake most of the time, but I saw a lot of animals I've never seen before, and that was just really cool. There's this duck. Now I'm going to forget what it's called. A loom? I think it's called a loom. But it deep dives in the water and can be underwater for a really, really long time, and it fishes in there. So it was cool to see them. And I think I'm just taking after my mother and bird watching, which is scary, but it was just a really beautiful thing. And I got to hang out with a lot of people that were a lot of fun and loved me, and that's always a blessing to be just around family and friends who love you. So it was just, the last couple of days have definitely just been filled with God's hand and glory, and it was awesome. So this past week, this sermon was an introduction to the enneagram, and so Jeff and Aaron worked together to kind of introduce it, talk about the types they were, and so I figured I'd share with you all today the enneagram number that I am. And also I'll tell you my introduction to enneagram. So I had never really heard of it, maybe heard it mentioned, but it wasn't really a thing when I was in college. And then I went to seminary, and all of a sudden in seminary, everybody knew their enneagram number and they would talk about it. So they would say things like, yeah, I'm just not sure about what professor said about this. Then again, my enneagram number is this, which means I often doubt, or something like that. They would just bring their own self-awareness into why they were reacting to things the way that they were. And it helps me understand the people who were mentioning their enneagram. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so I figured I would look up what mine was. And I did. I was a strong 5 from the start. There was never any maybe you're this or you're a little bit of this and that. I was definitely a 5. I've always definitely been a 5. So they call the 5 the investigator. The basic fear of all 5s is being useless, helpless, or incapable. The desires is to be capable and incompetent. So I think the phrase often heard by probably a lot of 5s is, you're so wise. And if you're young, you're probably like, wow, you're so wise for your age. But that often is just people noticing our personality tendencies, which I am always reading a book. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm watching TED Talks. I'm doing all these things to learn as much information as possible because I desire to innovate and to be the one in the room that can think of something outside of the box and to push the envelope of what is possible. But that's really just my general personality type. It's how I perceive my value in groups and in rooms is, am I able to contribute to this conversation in a way that is valuable and effective and new? And if I can't, if I don't have a deep knowledge of a topic being spoken about, I often won't speak at all. Some 5s, I've often heard, you're such a great listener, which I suppose can be true. But I think what's often happening in those moments is not necessarily that I want to cling on every word being spoken, but that I don't feel competent enough. I don't feel knowledgeable enough on the topic to contribute to the conversation. So I'd rather say nothing at all. My mom would always say, if you don't have anything kind to say, don't say anything at all. But for the 5, that might sound more like if you don't have anything super valuable and effective to say, don't say anything at all, which isn't always helpful, but it's definitely what we tend to. So they talked about this in the sermon a bit, but the Enneagram is not meant to be like, hey, this is who you are, end of story. It's meant to be a tool that helps you see your strengths and weaknesses. So for me, for fives, it would be we often are the wise one in the group. We know a lot because we spend a lot of time seeking to understand more and gain more information and knowledge. And so, like, in regards to theology, seminary was a blast for me because you have to learn so much. You go so deep. We're looking at the why behind what we believe. And that is just right up my alley. And I had so much fun. So I often lean towards teaching and explaining to others why things are the way that they are, because that's what I personally like to understand. So some people have mentioned, in our devotionals, how all of us are so different in what we talk about. And often I'll take what we're doing for meditation moments and go even deeper in it. I'll read commentaries and watch videos on it and then come here to share it with you, because that's what I found super interesting and valuable. But that's not true for all our personality types. And so you'll see us all bringing something different to light because just different things stand out to each of us. But some trouble spots of fives are these. I'm going to share with you my weaknesses. So fives often get deep in thought, and it looks something like someone's talking about a topic and I'll think, okay, what does that mean for the future? Who would be involved? Who does that hurt? Just thinking of all the different avenues and loopholes involved. And often what that does, though, the negative side, is it pulls you out of the moment. So especially in relationships with other people, I will observe how they're acting, observe what they're saying, absorb it, and then think, okay, what does that mean for when they're a parent, or what does that mean for friends, or how does that age with this person? Like just all of these things about future and past. And I realize that these deep thought processes that have taken me different directions have actually pulled me out of the moment, and I forget to be fully present with a person, which is really disappointing to people who desire quality time and for you to show up with your whole self. Fives also tend to be intense and high strung and find it difficult to unwind. How I experience this is I get very, very stimulated by new information. So I'll start, for example, I'll notice a plant that I don't know what it is. And so I'll spend some time looking up what it is. And is it intrusive? And where did it come from? And is it local? And just so deep into something so small. Because I just want to understand more. And someone will say, oh, that's a really beautiful plant. And I'll say, oh, yeah. Well, do you know where it comes from? Do you know that it's this? Do you know that it's that? Because I get excited that I've learned so much about this thing and I want to share it with someone else. But not everybody wants to know all the smallest little details about every little plant. Not everybody wants to know the migration pattern of that bird that they're enjoying the chirps of. It just comes off as overwhelming, just depending on the sort of person, your personality type. And so we have to be aware that this might be really exciting and we might get a wave of stimulation, but just to take a breath and be like, okay, this was really cool. But not everybody is going to share the same level of excitement. And the additional weakness that I feel I get in trouble, per se, most for, is that fives find it difficult to trust people, to open up to them emotionally, or to make themselves accessible in various ways. So how this basically pans out for me is, like I said, we spend so much time thinking and processing and projecting. Not projecting as in, oh, here's what's inside of me and this is true for you, but projecting as in imagining the future and what this could mean for the future. And when you have a couple bad experiences with people who act a certain way, it's easy to then say, to meet them and to think, I've known someone like this before, and I know that this sort of relationship doesn't pan out well for me. And so while this is true, this doesn't mean that this is who I am, that I'm unable to feel. I've actually had an unhelpful conversation with someone before in regards to Enneagram, and they said something along the lines of, well, you're a 5, and so you're unlikely to really be emotionally involved in this. You're going to be very cut off. And that's actually not true. Just because a 5 is a thinking type doesn't mean there isn't feeling. It means that the feeling is going to come after the thought process. So I'm going to experience something with my brain before I experience something with my heart. So we've talked in sermons in the past about grief, how everybody experiences grief differently. And this has a lot to do with our personality types. So for me, when I think of the absolute most grief-filled moment in my life, my first response was a combination of shock and indifference. I felt like I couldn't process what was going on, which is probably a good definition of what shock is. And so I couldn't identify a feeling within myself at all. And as hours, days went by, and I started to take in that information and really process it, that's when the feelings came like an ocean, and I felt just drowned. And so that would be a negative example of how the Enneagram can be used to identify, oh, well, you're a 9, so you're this, or so this is what you are feeling. These are helpful tools to help us see strengths and weaknesses in ourselves, but they're not meant to tell someone who they are or what they are feeling. Because in that moment when that person said, so you're, likely not processing this emotionally, I felt a lot. And so it really was belittling of the feelings that I was feeling. It made me feel like someone basically was telling me I didn't care, because I do care. I just don't experience things with my heart first, and there's nothing wrong with that. As you experience your type, your likelihood to feel things or think things, there's nothing positive or negative about who you are. God intentionally and lovingly created you as you are for a purpose to further the kingdom. A cool example of the Enneagram that I got to use it for is me, and I've talked about her before in sermons, but she was my roommate all throughout grad school. Her name is Kelsey. We were best friends our first year, and then we started living together, and while we were friends, we weren't hanging out the way we were before. It felt like our friendship kind of stagnated, and nothing happened, but we both came to a point where we didn't know how to move forward. We wanted to kind of tap back into that friendship we had before, but we didn't know how. And so what we did was we looked up our Enneagrams in relationship with each other. So she is a 9, which is a peacemaker. I am a 5, I'm an investigator. And so we looked them up, and basically what it pulled up was strengths of 5s and 9s in relationship with each other and problem areas. And so I'm going to read a little bit to you of what we read together that day. 9s don't always know what they're feeling or how to express themselves adequately. And this is just so true for our relationship. Kelsey is such a peacekeeper. She's a beautiful human being, but oftentimes couldn't communicate with her words what she wanted herself or what she was feeling. And I am a very cut to the chase, don't beat around the bushes sort of person. I don't like to waste time. When people take 10 minutes to explain what could have taken 1 minute to explain, I get deeply frustrated. And so while she went round and around and around trying to figure out and explain to me what was going on in her, I'd get really frustrated. But I also didn't realize that was what was happening. I just felt frustrated with her. So after we read that it's not just that she's trying to, be kind to me, or it's not anything besides she truly within herself doesn't even know what's happening. And so her round and a roundabout way of talking to me was her trying to pinpoint within herself what was going on. And so it was actually very kind of her to talk to me while she was trying to figure it out. And I just needed to learn that. Nines and fives are both space people. So if there's like a problem happening between me and someone else, I'm likely to give it some days and some space and some time for us to process. She is the same way. We both value independence, and so we were both giving each other so much space and independence, and neither of our personality types is likely to take initiative when it comes to relationship. So when it comes to saying, okay, let's have dinner together this week, or let's go work out one of these mornings together, neither one of us were doing that. So it was sort of stagnating. Often fives, again, are very analytical. And so I would watch her and listen to her and sort of decide how I thought she was feeling and acting and say, hey, it looks like you're doing this, or hey, like, you haven't been sleeping, and, all of these things. And she would get frustrated that I was analyzing every little part of her life, even though I didn't even really realize I was doing it, because it's just a natural tendency. So we just looked at all this stuff and we were like, okay, so we're right now going to take initiative. And we set days we were having dinner together, and we set activities we were going to do together. And it got so much better after that night of us just deciding to look up our enneagram types and our trouble areas. And once it got brought to light, we were like, okay, we can do this. We can move forward now that we know where we're erring and how to move forward. And I was actually just stood in her wedding like 2 weeks ago, and it's such a beautiful friendship and relationship that was in a lot of ways helped by the enneagram. So that's a positive way that it can be used. In today's meditation moments, we encourage you to read John chapter 7, verses 1 through 52. And it's part of Jesus's life, and Jesus knows he's going to be killed if he goes somewhere, and there's a lot of pushing and pulling. But they highlight denial, and Jesus is all, why do you want to kill me? And they're like, we don't want to kill you. But they did want to kill him. And so I think ultimately today's meditation moments can be boiled down to this question: what are you trying to prove? That's a phrase we often use a lot, but it's a good phrase to literally ask ourselves and to turn inward. And so when you're part of a group, or when you're in relationship with your spouse or your children, and you find yourself have this big emotion or this big opinion on something, and you just can't let go of it, that's a good moment to look inward and say, what am I trying to prove here? Am I so strong on this opinion because I have a fear that my child won't be safe? Or do I have this big, strong opinion because I'm trying to prove my own worth in this conversation? Whatever it is, look at it. And if you're courageous enough, bring that to light. Say to that person, you know what? I have a fear for your safety, or I have a fear for not appearing like a great parent or a great partner, or I have a fear of not being a great contributor to this relationship or to this conversation or to this meeting. And so that's what's breeding this passion behind this. And it feels very vulnerable to say that, but I think it helps bring other people in, even deeper in relationship with you. And I think we can be even more effective in teams and in relationships with each other when we're honest about where things are coming from within us. Because otherwise we come to gridlocks. We come to, this is what I think, and this is what I think, and that is the end of the story. But I think it's much more valuable when you come to the table with, this is what I think this is where it's coming from, and I want to know what you think and where that's coming from in you, so we can try to maneuver and find a solution. I think the enneagram used in a positive way, it could be very helpful in the political realm. Why are we doing this? Why do we do this over and over and over again? And what fear is this addressing within us? I encourage you, if you haven't already, I know Aaron said the Enneagram tests online that are available for free didn't work super well for him. It worked great for me. It worked great for a lot of people that I know. Not saying it will for you, but I definitely think it's worth a shot, at least to get you started. Just take it, see what it says. Look up, if you get 8, look up Enneagram type 8 and see if you identify with that type. And just kind of start exploring what's going on within yourself. I think it would be a lot of fun for you as we go through these sermon series and start talking about different types, for you to know before you go into that, what Enneagram type you are, maybe even, what your spouse or your partner or your children are, especially trouble relationships. If you have a really hard time with someone, trying to maybe ask them if they know their Enneagram type, see if they'll take the test. Just look at the types for yourself and see if you can see them in a type, and then look up your Enneagram in relationship with theirs and see, where are these trouble areas? What's deeper happening between us that is probably more than this surface level problem I feel like is keeping us from being in a good relationship with each other. I hope that you get as excited about this as we are. Again, it's not meant to be like this is who you are. It's just meant to be a fun tool. We'll see characters in the Bible and, which characteristics they lean towards and their weaknesses. And I just think it's so interesting and fun. So I invite you now to pray with me, and also don't forget to share any prayer requests that you may have, because again, we really want to lift those up with you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for creating each of us so uniquely. You know the numbers of hairs on our heads. You knew us before we were even formed in the womb. You know us exactly as we are, our personalities and our weaknesses and our strengths and our ability to understand you and others and be in relationship with you and others. You love us so much the way that we are. You see our weaknesses and you still call us your holy and beloved children. You see our strengths and you encourage us to be disciples of others, to go out into the world and to reflect you and the strengths that you have given us. Help us to see ourselves honestly, to lift up our strengths and be confident in them, and to see the ways that we can grow and to not be discouraged by that, but to be propelled and excited that we have the opportunity to grow and form into the likeness of you every day. We love you and we are thankful for all that you are. We are thankful for all the people you have put into our lives, as different and sometimes crazy as they may seem to us. And I just pray that you help us be honest. Help us be rooms full of truth tellers and truth seekers. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you for joining me on today's devotional. Again, I encourage you to look up your Enneagram type and just join us